I realized that when I'm showing recipient site design, I show the final product. But there is actually a very stepwise, logical fashion that needs to be followed from the beginning to the end. And I thought I would show you the step-by-step process in which I create my recipient sites and then show you the final design product. Part of the inspiration for this was I was taking photographs for a lecture I'm giving in November of this year in St. Louis for my hair course on the micro steps of hairline creation. So after taking these photographs and putting them into a PowerPoint or keynote presentation, I decided I should go ahead and just make a video of this and give you my lecture that I'm about to present to my colleagues in November. So this is a lady, early 20s, who is interested in lowering her hairline. We planned over 3,000 grafts to help design this hairline. So if you think about this, 3,000 grafts is a mega session. For a lot of men, I'm covering their entire scalp from their hairline all the way to the back. And so this is a very concentrated delivery of grafts. First of all, I start out with my one hair grafts. This is 2 or 3 rows of one hair grafts. And I originally, you don't see this because I already wiped it off, plan out the actual angulation and design of this. So these are one hair grafts designed across the hairline. This is the left side and this is the right side over here. This is the central zone. This is about 2 or 3 rows with a few sentinel hairs. After I've done the one hair sites, oh, by the way, as I go over to this side on the right and the left, I've switched over coronal sites. Coronal sites allow me to make the sites be flatter. Essentially what a coronal site is, it's a site where the needle goes left and right instead of forward and backwards. So these are sagittal sites. You can see it goes forward and backwards this way. These sites are coronal sites. They go down this way. It allows me to angle my sites a little bit flatter. The next after that is I create my 2 hair sites. Now, I don't create all my 2 hair sites. I create the majority of them, and I leave some left over, and I'll explain to you why in the next image. But what I try to do here is I wanted to create a little bit more sweep on the right to follow her natural hair pattern. As you can see, these hairs almost angle backwards. So there's a transitional phase where I've got to start going this direction and arcing it over. If you look at these hair angles, they actually go forward. So once again, these go backwards, these go forwards. So what I'm trying to do is these grafts go more straight forward, and you'll see that they sweep more laterally than backwards on the right side. There's actually more recession on the right side as well. If you look over to the side over here, the sites go from these sagittal sites over to these coronal sites in order to help the lateral grafts to lie flatter. And I think that's a nice little treatment that will allow this to create more visual density and more natural. The same thing on the other side. One point I want to mention before I forget here is that, there's 2 ways to do a female hairline lowering. So this is a young lady that, at her age bracket is not losing hair, but just wants a much lower hairline. So the one way is surgically to actually make a large incision across here and move this forward. The problem with that is several-fold. The first of all, if I had used that avenue, is that you can see that this whole area, this entire area on both sides are not amenable to hairline lowering. You would need to do a transplant anyways for this. The only area is this short distance that surgically you can move it forward. But if you look, it's almost 3 times the width on the sides, and all of this would not be amenable to a surgical hairline lowering, only the frontal area. And this is very typical where if someone wants to lower their hairline and you do it surgically, besides having prolonged anesthesia or numbness of the scalp for many months, if not indefinitely, you lose the ability to actually improve the outer aspects, the temple area, which oftentimes is very, very problematic. The other point here is that if you look, she's got a lot of existing hairs over here, but they're very weak, especially in the frontal hairline. There's no frame here. So this, even though she's not balding or receding, this is just a typical hairline that's just very weak and that lacks the shape. So to create a much more defined hairline is very, very important. So in other words, all of this hair, if we did some kind of surgical hairline lowering, you would have to remove it because these are useless hairs. But what I've done is I've incorporated that in the design and just gone a little bit more gentle and not quite as dense in those zones. So then the next step is to come back with 3 hair sites and recreate some beginning of the 3 hair sites. If you look, The three hair sites are farther back, and as I finish, there's a little gap left. And the reason to go from the back to the front is that I want to make sure I don't run out of sites and I have enough two hairs left in place so that I can make sure that the entire distance is covered. It is very, very important that there's enough adequate density, especially in the anterior frontal frame of the face, so that this area looks strong, but not as important in the far, far back region, but you don't want it to be a wall of hair that nothing, with no transition point going back to the back. So that's why I build from front to back and back to front. So someone who's novice doing this, who's incapable of really keeping the number count well, is that they're going to run out of grafts here, and then you're stuck with all of this not working. So that's why I build front to back and then back to front, and then I fill in the gap. And this is at the end. You can see that I filled in the gap very nicely. And this is the frontal hairline arching, as I alluded to earlier. You can see these are sweeping backwards, and then these go forward this direction. And then these are all the coronal sites that I mentioned. If you look at the total design pattern that I've created, I always make this at the very end of my procedure for my staff to evaluate. The black circles are the coronal sites I mentioned earlier in the video. I've mentioned that I've done about 2 rows plus sentinels. Sentinels are the grafts, the hairs that stick out by themselves here, so my staff can place more easily. It's also a blueprint for future design. So if we walk through this, I've done 450 one hair grafts, combining both sagittal in the central hairline and coronal in the lateral aspect. That is out here. And then I did, this is a little out of order, I did the 2 hair grafts here. 19 gauge needle, what I did was I used a total of 1770 sagittal plus coronal sites. This should be a plus sign. But the sagittal sites were all across this area. Then the coronal sites you saw in the previous diagrams or photographs out here. And then the 18 gauge needles, I did about 800 across this area to reinforce the hairline and create strength. So it's important also, I didn't mention this earlier, how I allocated where my 2 and 3 hair grafts go. In the temporal region, you don't want 3 hair sites here because it will look unnatural. They'll look too thick. They won't look like a natural temporal zone. So anything on the vertical plane of the scalp, this is vertical, this is horizontal. On the vertical plane of the scalp where the black circles are, I really want to do this with 2 hair grafts. 3 hair grafts, in other words, 3 hairs per follicular unit, create a much stronger visual density back here, but you don't need as many of the 3 hair grafts. So I made tight 2 hair grafts across the bulk of this, and then 3 hair grafts are just blending into her existing hairline. So hopefully this video of female hairline lowering, really mechanically walking through the micro design step by step, makes a lot of sense to you, or at least gives you an idea, an appreciation of why hairline design is truly an art as well as a science.